The cold came in off the ridge like something with teeth. Emmeline felt it through her knees where they pressed. The shingles felt it work up through the wool stockings and settle into the bone. She drove another nail, and the hammer sang wrong iron against frozen pine, a pitch too high, the sound of something resisting. She pulled the nail, repositioned, drove it again, true this time, and the shingle seated flat. Below the road was empty except for the skin of ice that had crept out from the wheel ruts overnight. She didn't look down. She kept one hand pressed to the roof slope whenever she reached for the next shingle, two fingers hooked under the ridge cap, her weight distributed the way timber demands, never where it looks easy, always where it will hold. The bonnet strings bit into her jaw. She'd tied them tight enough to leave marks, tight enough that the wind, which had been testing the brim since before sunup, hadn't won yet. She heard them before she saw them. Thaddeus Greer walked loud on purpose. 3 men behind him, boots hitting the frozen road like something being announced. Emmeline Voss. He stopped below, tilted his head back. What in the Lord's name are you doing up there? She set another nail. Woman your age ought to be inside. He said it the way men say things they've already decided are true. Before December you'll freeze solid on that roof and nobody'll find you till spring thaw. She drove the nail. One of the men laughed. Thaddeus reached into his coat and pulled out a handful of coins, not enough for anything she could see that from here, and pitched them into the mud at the base of the wall. The sound they made was very small. That's what your quarter-acre is worth to a buyer who doesn't need it. I'm being generous. He smoothed his glove. Sell now, save yourself the misery of a winter you won't survive. Emmeline climbed down from the roof. She moved the way she always moved, no hurry, no performance. She lifted the tow rope of the oak sled she'd built in late October, the one with the curved runners she'd steamed and bent to a radius she'd calculated on paper 3 times before she touched a single piece of wood. The sled sat loaded with split timber, each piece quarter-sawn the grain, running true so it would burn long and clean and not spit sparks onto the floor. No man in Ironwood Ridge had been able to split that grain. She'd done it herself, every piece with a froe and a wooden mallet in the tool shed at 4 in the morning when the light was bad and her hands were already cold. She picked up the coins, counted them, set them on Thaddeus Greer's boot. I'll need those for something useful, she said. She pulled the sled toward the woodpile. Behind her she heard Thaddeus say something to his men. She didn't turn around. She heard their boots on the frozen road retreating, and then nothing but the wind and the creak of the pine tops on the ridge above the tree line. She was loading the 3rd log when she heard the other footsteps. Different, quieter, deliberate, the footfall of something that did not want to be heard but knew it would be. She didn't look up. A shadow crossed the sled and kept moving. When it was gone, there was something new resting against the nearest log. A whetstone the length of her palm, steel gray, the surface worn to a smoothness that meant years of use. The kind of whetstone a man does not give away unless he intends something by it. She looked up. The brim of the tree line was empty, not even a branch still moving. The order came down by the 2nd morning. Emmeline knew it before she reached the general store. She knew it from the way Harlan Boggs turned his back when she pushed through the door, and from the way his wife found something urgent to do behind the curtain. She set her list on the counter. Coal salt flannel by the yard. Harlan didn't turn around. She waited. The clock on the shelf ticked 11 times. She picked up her list and walked out. The feed merchant. The dry goods widow on the East End. The tanner who owed her 3 favors from the summer she'd repaired his bellows frame for nothing. Every door told her the same thing in a different way, a back turned, a latch, dropped a boy sent to say his father wasn't in. She walked home with empty hands and the whetstone in her coat pocket, its weight the only warm thing she could feel. The ground had locked up solid by the 1st week. She found roots by memory, by the way certain ground swells in a dry autumn and holds its shape into the freeze. She used an iron bar to break the crust, and a narrow spade she'd rehandled herself after the original ash split. She set snares in the brush line, 4 of them, the toggle trigger kind, that don't rust up in wet weather, and checked them each morning before the light came full. By day 6, 2 fingers on her left hand had cracked open at the knuckles. She packed them with pine pitch and wrapped them in a scrap of muslin and kept working. On the 10th morning, she opened her door and nearly stepped on the rabbit. It was laid on the top step, gutted and cleaned, the cavity scraped smooth, the way a man cleans a kill when he has time and cares about the meat. Folded over it, pinning it against the cold planks, was a coat. Bear hide. Enormous, the shoulders of it wider than her doorframe. The fur had gone rough in patches, and 3 long tears ran parallel across the back panel, the edges dried stiff and dark. She stood in the doorway for a long time. She thought about the ridge, about what 10 nights without that coat meant above the tree line where the wind doesn't break for anything, and the temperature drops another 20 degrees the moment the sun goes behind the peaks. She brought both inside. She didn't let herself think while she cooked. Thinking would make her chest do something she didn't have time for. She ate slowly, sitting close to the stove, and when the bowl was empty, she lit the second lamp and pulled the coat across her workbench. The tears were bad. Whatever had made them had done it all at once, 3 parallel lines, the kind you get from weight and pressure, not from snagging. The hide had pulled and stretched and tried to hold before it gave. She turned it over in the lamplight and read the whole story of it in the grain of the leather. She opened the box under the bench. She had 1 spool of waxed thread left. The good kind boar bristle stiffened at the needle end, the kind that seats itself under the surface of the hide and doesn't work loose in wet or cold. She'd been saving it. She threaded the needle. She worked through the full dark, pulling each stitch tight, and even burying the knot the way her mother had taught her, not on top, where it would rub, but inside where nothing could reach it. The tears closed clean. When she ran her thumb across the seam, she could feel it, but barely a ridge no thicker than a vein. She finished before the lamp guttered out. She folded the coat along its original creases. She could see where they fell, the hide remembered them, and wrapped it in a piece of oilcloth she'd kept from the summer. Before first light, she walked to the tree line. She set the bundle at the base of the first big pine where the shadows were still total and the snow had not been touched. She didn't look into the trees. She walked back to the house without hurrying. Behind her, the sky above Ironwood Ridge had gone the color of a bruised green-black at the edges, the clouds massing from the northwest in a wall that had no top she could see. The air smelled like iron and nothing else. The storm hit at noon, but it had been dark since 10. The first gust took the weather vane off Harlan Boggs's roof and drove it sideways into the road like a thrown knife. The second gust was worse. Emmeline heard the whole sequence from inside her walls, the initial crack, then the groan of timber finding its limit. Then the particular silence that means something is deciding whether to hold. Her walls held. She'd mortised every corner joint herself, driven the cross braces at the angle she'd worked out on paper over 2 winters of watching which structures failed and which didn't. The wind hit her house and the house pushed back. She was banking the stove when she heard the screaming. Not wind, not timber. A woman's voice then, children, the high, sharp kind of crying that cuts through everything. It came from the direction of the central warehouse 300 yards east, and it did not stop. She pulled on her coat, picked up the tool chest by its rope handle, 20 pounds of iron and oak, the weight of it familiar in her shoulder socket. She went out into it. The wind hit her full in the face and she tucked her chin and walked. Ice pellets drove horizontal off the ridge, and she kept her eyes down, reading the ground, by memory counting paces. She'd walked this road 4,000 times. She didn't need to see it. The warehouse doors were open. Someone had tried to bar them and failed. She stepped inside. The lantern light was bad and chaotic, 3 or 4 flames swinging in the draft. It took her eyes a moment. Then she saw the ceiling. The main purlin, the horizontal beam that spanned the full width of the building and carried the roof load, had separated from its king post on the east end. The joint had failed the wood split, not at the fastener, but beside it, which meant the fastener had been placed wrong, to begin with too close to the end grain. The beam had dropped 4 inches on that side and was still moving. She could see it moving. Slow the way heavy things move when they are deciding. Below it, pressed against the far wall, Cora Hennessy had both arms around 3 children, 2 other women beside her. Thaddeus's 4 men stood in a loose cluster in the center of the room, all of them looking up, none of them moving. "The east joint," Emmeline said. Nobody looked at her. She crossed the room. She put her hand flat on Thaddeus Greer's chest and walked him backward 2 steps. He made a sound. She was already past him, unlatching the tool chest, pulling out the 2 long spikes and the block she'd shaped from white oak last February, for a reason she hadn't been able to name at the time. The scaffold was a cattle gate propped on barrels, someone's panicked improvisation. She tested it with 1 foot. It held. She went up. From up there she could see the full extent of the failure. The beam had rotated slightly, which meant the load had redistributed to the west joint, and that joint was now carrying what 2 joints were built for. She had minutes, not more. She set the block first, positioning it under the beam's low end with her knee, while her hands drove the first spike through the angle brace. The hammer swings had to be exact too hard, and she'd shock the remaining joint too soft, and the spike wouldn't seat before the beam moved again. She counted the force the way she always counted it. Not in feeling, but in measurement. The swing, the resistance, the give. Second spike. She felt the beam shift under her hands and drove the last blow before it could move further. The block seated. The beam stopped. The warehouse went quiet, except for the wind working the walls and the sound of the children crying, quieter now, winding down. She came down off the scaffold. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from the particular aftermath of precision under pressure, the body releasing what it held back. She was reaching for the tool chest when the window above the door blew in. The gust that came through it was not wind. It was a fist. It crossed the full length of the warehouse in 1 second and took the bonnet off her head with its strings and all snapped clean and carried it out through the broken frame into the black dark beyond. The cold hit the top of her head like water. She did not move. She stood with the tool chest rope in one hand and felt the room change. Nobody spoke. That was the worst of it. If they had laughed, she could have held herself together. Laughter she knew how to stand in front of. But the silence that dropped over the warehouse was the kind that has weight, the kind that presses down on a person from every direction at once. She felt the cold air move across the top of her head. Felt it reach her scalp the way cold always reaches the thing you've kept covered longest. Her hair had come loose when the bonnet went. It hung down now, all of it past her shoulders, and in the swinging lamplight, she already knew what they were seeing, because she had looked in the mirror every morning for 3 years and made herself look away. Silver. Not gray silver, full through, bright as frost on a window glass. Cora Hennessy's eyes dropped first, then the women beside her. The children had stopped crying and were simply watching the way children watch things they don't understand but know are serious. Thaddeus Greer found his footing. She could hear it in the way his boot shifted on the plank floor, one small adjustment, a man settling into the stance he uses when he's about to say something he's been wanting to say for a long time. Well, his voice had come back to him completely. There it is. She kept her eyes on the tool chest. Her fingers found the latch. Closed it. The click of it was very loud. Knew it was there. He wasn't speaking to her. He was speaking to the room with the circle of lantern light, to the people in it. Town's known it was there. Some things you can hide under a hat, but you can't hide what you are. One of his men made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She picked up the tool chest. The rope handle pressed the cracks in her left hand open again, and she felt the sting of it and used the sting to stay where she was standing, not moving toward the door, not yet. If she moved now, it would look like running. She would not run. Her knees did not agree. She felt them go soft, in a way she had no control over, a slow unlocking from the inside, and she put one hand on the barrel beside her, and the barrel was the only reason she was still upright. Thaddeus said something else. She didn't hear the words. The blood in her ears was too loud. The big doors opened. They opened outward, which meant whoever was on the other side had pulled them against the full pressure of the storm, and they came open hard and fast, and the wind that entered was enormous. Every lamp in the warehouse lurched. The shadows swung wild. Silas walked out of the dark. She had never seen him indoors before. The warehouse ceiling, which she knew to be 14 feet at the peak, looked lower with him in it. He was still wearing the bear coat, her stitching visible across the back of it, 3 dark seams running parallel, tight and clean. Snow covered his shoulders and had packed into the creases of his collar, and he did not appear to notice it. He walked through the center of the room. The men who had not moved for the last 10 minutes moved now, stepping back, opening a path without being asked. He stopped in front of her. Up close, his face was all weather, the skin of a man who has spent more nights outside than in the scar along his jaw, gone silver white like old wood. His eyes were dark and absolutely steady, and they were on her face and nowhere else. His hands came up. They were rough as bark and very careful, and he held her face the way you hold something you have carried a long distance without letting it touch the ground. "I only see you," he said. Not loud. Just said, the way a man states a thing he has known for a long time and is tired of keeping to himself. Her breath left her in one piece. Behind them, Thaddeus Greer had gone very still. The warehouse had gone very still. The storm pressed on the walls. The lamps steadied. Silas did not look at any of it. His eyes stayed where they were. The whispering started in the corner where the light didn't reach. She heard it the way you hear something you've been expecting, not with surprise but with a tiredness that goes all the way to the back of the throat. 2 of Thaddeus's men, their heads bent together, their eyes moving from her hair to each other and back. One of them said the word "cursed" at a volume that was not quite private. Silas turned his head. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move from where he stood. He simply turned and looked at the 2 men, the way a drop in temperature looks at standing water, and the whispering stopped as completely as if it had never existed. The taller man found something absorbing to study on the floor. The shorter one stopped breathing visibly. Thaddeus still had his footing. She could see him working to keep it, jaw set, shoulders squared, the posture of a man who has run this town for 15 years and is not prepared to stop tonight. "You want to defend that?" He said it at Silas, not as a question. "A woman who isn't fit to—" "Look at my coat," Silas said. The room went quiet in a different way than before. This quiet was not the quiet of people watching someone fall. It was the quiet of people holding very still because they sense something is about to be decided. Silas reached up to his collar and pulled the left side of it back, the section that ran along his neck, where the hide was thick and the stitching was buried deep. He worked 2 fingers into the seam. There was a pause, a small searching, and then he drew something out from between the layers of waxed thread. A single strand of silver hair. It caught the lamplight the way wire catches it, bright, hard, definite. He held it up, and the room saw it. "Found this 3 days back," he said. "When she returned my coat to me at the tree line, sewn up better than the day I cured the hide." He let the strand rest across his open palm. "I've slept under open sky in January. I've crossed the North Ridge in whiteout conditions 3 times and come back all 3 times. A man learns out there what holds and what doesn't." He looked at Emmeline then, and his voice did not change in volume or tone, but something in it shifted, a door opening on a room that had been closed a long time. "Iron goes brittle in hard cold. Green wood splits. But there's a grade of steel that comes out of the forge and the ice bath looking like nothing special, and that steel does not break. It does not bend past return." His thumb closed over the strand of hair. "This color is what that steel looks like when the light hits it right." The warehouse was completely still. That beam up there. He lifted his chin toward the purlin, toward her stitching of oak and iron spike holding the roof on over all their heads. She set that by hand in the dark with the wind coming through that window. You were all standing flat-footed watching it fall. His eyes moved across the room, not fast, not angry, just a complete accounting. So when she sells you timber this winter, you'll be buying it from the woman who kept your skull from being staved in tonight. I'd remember that each time I opened my mouth about what she does or doesn't look like. He turned back. Done. Thaddeus had nothing. She watched it happen, watched the thing he'd built his authority on drain out of his face the way color drains from a man when he's been hit somewhere deep. His mouth opened, closed. Cora Hennessy was the first one to look at Emmeline directly. Not with pity, with something else, something that took a moment to name because she hadn't seen it aimed at herself in years. Recognition. Plain and straight, one person to another. Emmeline stood up fully. Not a performance. Just the body doing what it does when the thing that was pressing it down has been lifted. Her hair hung loose and silver in the lamplight, and she left it there. The storm quit before dawn. It quit the way hard things quit all at once, no gradual letting up, just the wind dropping to nothing, and the silence coming in so complete it had its own sound. Emmeline stood on her porch in the gray pre-light and looked at what the storm had left behind. The east end of town was a wreckage of scattered timber-burst barrels and hay soaked black with meltwater. The community woodpile that Thaddeus had controlled since September, the one he'd used to set prices and punish households he didn't favor, had taken the full force of the northwest gust. What wasn't scattered across 200 yards of frozen ground was buried under a collapsed lean-to, the wood underneath it crushed and waterlogged and useless. Her woodshed stood. Her storehouse stood. Every structure she had built or reinforced with her own hands stood exactly where she had put it. She went inside and put the kettle on. They came at mid-morning. She heard them before she saw them, the sound of a group of people moving without confidence, the shuffling gait of men who have decided to do something humiliating and are walking slowly to delay the moment. She looked through the window. Thaddeus was in front, which surprised her. She had expected him to send someone else. That he had come himself meant things were worse for him than she'd calculated, and she had calculated them fairly bad. She put on her coat. She did not put on a bonnet. There was not a bonnet in the house, and she did not go looking for one. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch and stood. Thaddeus stopped at the base of the porch steps. He looked like a man who had aged 8 years since the previous night. The certainty that had lived in his posture for as long as she had known him was gone, not cracked, gone the way a thing goes when the foundation under it has been pulled clear. Behind him, 15 people from Ironwood Ridge stood in the cold. Cora Hennessy was among them. She met Emmeline's eyes and held them. "We need timber," Thaddeus said. "And what stores you have?" He did not say please. She had not expected him to manage that. "I know what you need," Emmeline said. She let the silence sit for a moment. Not from cruelty, from clarity. She wanted every person in that yard to understand that the silence existed because she was choosing to fill it, not because she was scrambling to find words. Dry cord wood, $4 a half cord. Salt pork, $2 the pound. Flour, $1.50. Payment before the goods leave the property. She looked at Thaddeus directly. Distribution goes by household size, not by who you're on good terms with. Hennessy family gets the same weight as everybody else. Same as the widow Pratt on the south end. Same as anyone you've been shorting since October. Thaddeus's jaw worked. Those are the terms. She said it flat, no heat in it. You want to negotiate, you can do it after you've found another woodpile. From the woodshed behind her came a single sound, the clean full-weight impact of an axe meeting ironwood. Then the two halves of the log falling away from each other onto the frozen ground. Then silence. Nobody in the yard turned to look. They didn't need to. The sound had said everything a sound could say. Thaddeus looked at the porch boards. Something moved through his face. She watched it move through and come out the other side as nothing, as a blank, as a man who has run out of the thing he ran on. He nodded. She went inside and began pulling the first invoice. Through the window, she could see the yard people sorting themselves into a line without being told, Cora organizing the families with children toward the front. Thaddeus stood to the side, separate now from the group he used to command, taking up no more space than anyone else. Silas came around from the woodshed and set a full load of quarter-sawn cord by the porch rail. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at her through the window one brief look and went back for the next load. Her hair caught the winter light coming off the snow. She didn't move it out of the way. She opened the ledger to a fresh page and picked up her pen.